Hello, everyone. Hello, everybody. Let's see if we can get a couple of people to respond in the chat box if you can hear me and see me. Let's see. We've been having technical difficulties. Woo! So we've been having a couple of technical difficulties. For those of you who don't know me, I am technologically challenged. And in the midst of this COVID craziness, I have not had an opportunity to make the adjustment to a technological world, much like a lot of other people that are in the same boat as me. So for this session, we are going to be just live streaming on YouTube. Please forgive me, everybody, for all of the technological errors that I'm going to commit during this next 30 to 45 minutes. Bear with me. I will try my very, very best to monitor the chat box just to make sure that I'm addressing your needs. And please know that part of my my need for intervention in technology is the fact that I don't necessarily know how to stream my PowerPoint through my computer. And so I'm going to try to do a combination of two things. Number one is I'm going to try to project it obviously much larger and in much better condition than it currently is. This is my old projector that I just happen to keep in my house. And I think my team has already done a really amazing job of uploading and sharing both to our website, which is www.tajulearning.com, as well as a link right here in the YouTube live channel that we're going to be streaming on. So if everybody will give me a couple of minutes just to get settled in, I promise not to take any more than 60 seconds of your time, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay. And let's see. No, I think that might be worse. That's definitely worse. Okay. So here's okay. So my good friends, because of course, like I shared, I am technologically challenged. We are going to go ahead and simply get started without access to the PowerPoint running behind me. I hope that doesn't throw anybody off too terribly much. I thank everybody for already sort of joining the chat box, letting me know that you are here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are recording this and we will post it on all the social media sites as well, okay? Welcome Judy, Ariana, Jennifer, Mari, Cristina, Amanda, Tracy, everybody else that's already joining in and saying hello. Te mando saludos, beso, abrazo, todo eso. Today, one of the most important things that I want to make sure that everybody understands is that this session really does frame or ground it in policy before we can really understand what it is that we should be doing, what assessment and grading and our online PD and capacity building efforts are for teachers, we really have to understand what it is that we have to be doing in order to to understand and protect the rights of some of our most vulnerable learners in our districts, okay? So I want to make sure that everybody knows how to get a hold of me. For those of you that don't have it directly, I'm not quite sure why you wouldn't know already, but you can get a hold of me. I'm getting info that there is terrible feedback. Let me see if I can rectify that. No, that's just adding music from my other laptop. Somehow it's better. Okay, whatever I did, we're gonna stick with that. So for those of you that aren't already following me, you can follow me on Twitter at Taju Learning. You can follow me on Facebook at Alexandra Guillermo Taju Learning, all one word, or email, which is probably the easiest, which is alexandra.guillermo@tajulearning.com. So I want to make sure that everybody knows sort of the foundation of all the work that Taju Learning does. It is really grounded in our equity framework. And I'm going to share this with you just simply from my other laptop, because I think it's critical for everybody to be on the same page as we discuss sort of our obligation, both moral and legal, to ensure that every student is supported in this shift during this crisis, right? So here is our equity framework. It really sort of follows 3 buckets of work, which is, why do schools exist? Like, what is the purpose of the educational system? Number 2 is, what happened and what is going on that prevents us from realizing that educational purpose, that educational dream, et cetera, et cetera. And number 3 is, what do we need to do as a school system in order to right that wrong, okay? And so that is the framework that sort of is the foundation of every piece of support that we do. And I want you to know that our search to find essential information for schools during this time, as well as to encourage and push certain practices versus discourage certain practices, not only are grounded in research and evidence-based practices and what works for language learners across a host of different program models, but also in those sort of equity understandings and that equity foundation. Okay, so that being said, I want to make sure that we jump right in. Before we get started, I want us to really take okay, so I have a steady stream of different messages coming in that there is feedback and there isn't feedback. So if I pause, just bear with me, friends. Know that it's just trying to make sure that I am accurately supporting you guys. But before we get started into the contents for today, I want to take just a moment to make sure that I give everybody about 60 seconds, maybe 2 minutes max, just to share their burning concerns at the policy level, mandates, regulations, the rights and protections for their language learners across the different program models in their particular districts, right? And because I believe that in order to address the real challenges that our schools have, we have to have an accurate and clear understanding of the challenges that are the most burning challenges for everybody involved, okay? So I'm gonna take just 2 minutes to take a pause, and I'm gonna ask that you jot down maybe just a phrase or two that represents the biggest challenge that your school, your families, your communities, your districts, your state is facing right now as it pertains to protecting the rights and ensuring, stability and continued educational opportunity and success for your multilingual learners. I'm going to put the timer on because I can't be trusted with time, and I'm going to put 2 minutes on the clock. about a minute and a half more. If you have any burning challenges, issues in terms of protecting or ensuring that the rights are protected and that the services and educational opportunities for your language learners, your multilingual learners, are continued and stabilized during this COVID sort of pandemic, please jot that down in the chat box. I thank those of you who have already sort of sent me your questions ahead of time or have already entered your challenges in the chat box. Awesome. I'm hearing that technology is an issue. Absolutely. The number, quantity, quality, I'll go ahead and add to that, of resources for dual kiddos. Absolutely. Just 15 more seconds if anybody wants to add another burning issue. Hello to my new friends who have joined the call. Yep. Accurate staffing. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and stop right there. For those of you who want to add additional challenges or issues, questions, things come up as we continue through this webinar, please do. My plan is to follow up with any questions or challenges that I wasn't accurately or efficiently able to get to in other sources, okay? So the three biggest challenges that I'm really hearing is quality and quantity of staff that's able to communicate with and make contact with families, the number of resources, and the challenge of technology. And so I want to go ahead and make sure that we get started. I think all three of those are going to be addressed in what was planned already. And then I'll loop back to a couple of things that I have already thought to provide with other districts, and we'll make sure that I make available to everybody that's joined on the call. The first thing that I want to make sure that everybody understands is that our Ls, our language learners, are a protected group of students under our civil rights laws, which means that the number one thing that we need to communicate with our districts, our state leaders, our regional leaders, particularly for states that are structured as regions rather than districts or parishes or whatever the case may be, is that we have a responsibility to our language learners across every single one of our program models to ensure that they have access to their programs, whether it's dual language, SIFE, ESL, ENL, bilingual education, sheltered classes, et cetera, and the activities that are inherently programmed within each of those program models, along with the activities that help them to engage meaningfully with their schools and with their grade level learning. Now, these students are protected under civil rights laws, even in the midst of COVID-19, if either through lack of language access, right? Access to English, access to Spanish, access to whatever the case may be that they normally get, or exposure in their own home, they would have substantially diminished engagement, right? So that's sort of the legal jargon that when I speak mostly with assistant superintendents, directors, executive directors, that's the language that I try to use. They are substantially diminished engagement, or they face substantial academic difficulty because of lack of language access or exposure in whatever is being offered at the district level, okay? That's number one. Now, in order to make sure that your district is protecting their civil rights, okay, regardless of people's personal beliefs, as school districts, we must ensure that we are protecting their civil rights. Schools are being asked to do a number of things. Now, I'm going to talk in a little bit about some of the waivers that have taken place in the last 2 weeks for 28 states, with at least 5 more states that I know of having submitted for waivers. okay? What schools have been asked to do is to make sure that you identify and meet students' language needs as soon as possible, okay? That may not have been day one, but it is an expectation of every school district, and every state that they meet their students' language needs as quickly as humanly possible. That every school provide meaningful participation and communication to every single one of their students' homes in a language that they can understand. That we work to ensure that part of the CARES, right, funding that's being issued to schools be utilized to ensure that staff and materials are put in place with the necessary training to ensure proper implementation. So if I'm asking students to do something, part of the funding that's being allocated to schools and part of Title III, Title II, right, their civil rights law, is that we are not only ensuring that we match staff to the kids who need it, but we're also ensuring that we train all staff to be effective in the students that they serve. And I think one of the biggest challenges that schools are facing, to be honest with you, is that across the country, this is sort of exposing the lack of training that gen ed teachers in particular and administrators have in terms of what it means to meet the needs of language learners. Finally, is that schools are being asked to take necessary steps to both provide assistance and to address the gaps in students being able to effectively participate in learning, in the learning community for each school across the country, and that we are taking the steps to provide assistance and address gaps and being able to communicate effectively with our families, okay? So making sure that we address the gaps in students being able to participate in learning, meaningful learning, and identifying and taking the steps to provide assistance and address the gaps in how we communicate with our families in a language that they understand, okay? I wanna make sure that I also take a pause right there very, very quickly, okay? Are there any questions, comments, feedback that people want to enter into the chat box? Any elaboration that I need to address right now? Okay. So I want to make sure that I talk specifically about a couple of these pieces because it really does address a lot of the questions that that came in through the chat box. Two of the requirements really does speak to access to materials in the native language, in the lote, the language other than English, if we are a dual language program or a bilingual program. And it speaks to some of the questions that already came up or challenges that already came up around staffing and the extent of staff that we have that have access to the home language for our families. Number one is we have to make sure that as we transition our families, and for some states like Illinois, which is where I live, we have already transitioned to this being the reality for the remainder of the 2019-2020 school year. As we make that transition, we have to understand that some of our parents have access to English, some of our guardians have access to English, some of our parents and guardians have access to technology. Some of them have access to technology, but they do not have access to the necessary networks in order to utilize a lot of the learning platforms that are being offered to our families. The shift cannot be for our language learners a 100% digital shift, okay? One of the things that schools are going to have to balance is that there's going to need to be blended learning options that allow schools to more effectively leverage second language acquisition theory, which says The best learning happens with things that tap into students' background knowledge, things that are already part of their daily lives, things that they already have access to and can engage with in a variety of ways. Now, what does that mean? That means that number one, if your school, if your school doesn't have access to the languages that are spoken at home, number one is the school district's responsibility is to figure out how do they get access to tools that are as efficient as possible for families to learn how to navigate and use. All right. Now, the legal language, and I always like to give people the legal language, particularly when we're taking back information to our superintendents, to our politicians, local governing bodies, and that is that they have to be able to have tools and resources that can be used with substantial ease of use. And I think that language is very, very important for us to all understand. My first language is Spanish, and if I have the burden as a parent to not only become now the teacher at home to facilitate and be a co-partner, but the lead partner in the learning process for my students, and I also have to figure out how to do it in a language that I don't have access to because the school is relinquishing over all of their responsibilities to navigate that divide for me, we have created a system of inequity for kids that is absolutely, I don't know how we recover from those missteps, because those missteps aren't things that we can't mitigate, okay? What are some of the things that schools can do very easily to bridge the gap between lack of access on the school district's part to the native languages of our families' homes? Is to, number one, tap into your community partners. Okay, I cannot say this enough. Most of our communities have access to linguistic abilities that are far beyond our own access within our own homes, our own district, our own staffing formulations, okay? Number two is to leverage some of the tools that you already have much more efficiently. What I mean by that is to say, I've recommended to quite a few districts that, listen, if you already use the Google Suite, if you're already using Google Classrooms, work to minimize the amount of additional apps you're asking parents and families to navigate that are only available in English, because that's not going to help them. Those tools, those apps, those resources do not provide our families who don't speak English and don't have access to English substantial ease of use, okay? Better than that, or more effective than that, is providing families with additional tools, resources on public networks. I don't know what excuse me, I'm having a brain freeze right now, like I usually do. But many TV stations, local TV stations, allow people to stream, are allowing people to stream, and are partnering with different community organizations, including public schools, to make sure that we can get information to parents, and that we can make sure that we partner with different organizations that can translate and interpret different documents that we have. Not only that, but through Google, we can really translate a host of things. I think Google right now is up to 127 different languages. They have print to speech. They have all sorts of things that we can be leveraging in order to make sure that we are doing our part to mitigate our linguistic limitations as a school district in order to meet the needs and communicate effectively and provide meaningful learning experiences to our students and their families, okay? The other piece that I want to make sure that I address is this idea of providing meaningful interactions, meaningful access to information and content that is grade level based and in the language that can be understood, particularly for our dual language and bilingual programs, who for many of them, spend a substantial amount of time in languages other than English. And that is, we are going to have to say, listen, perhaps some things are going to come from apps, some things are going to come from our traditional sources that we are curating for our gen ed population out of ease of use, financial burden, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is that that is not going to be efficient. We are going to have to not think outside of the box, but we're box for some things in dual language and bilingual programs. We're going to have to be able to allow students to engage with real, if it's Spanish speaking, a Spanish speaking dual language program, real maybe TV programs or movies that are age appropriate that they can utilize with closed captioning at the bottom in another language. We're going to have to give them opportunities to have access to physical books that can be sent home, and learning toolkits that can be put together in a range of languages that meet their needs. We're going to have to think about, how do we connect the arts? How do we connect math in the places that math naturally lives, like the kitchen, outdoors, et cetera, et cetera. I want us to throw out the box that says, if we don't have a worksheet, if we don't have the same, that it's not going to be good enough to provide our dual language and bilingual learners, because that's simply not true, okay? What we must do is ensure that our language learners, particularly in our dual language and bilingual programs, have access to grade level, rigorous, and meaningful learning, not necessarily simply a number of minutes of engagement time, which is one of the things that I've heard in many, many districts, engagement time in online or digital platforms, okay? So I wanna pause there again, because that was sort of a large chunk that incorporated not only matching staff to student needs, but it's also in terms of the technology challenge and the linguistic divide between most school districts and the families that they are serving, and the communities that they're serving across the country. So let me pause and see if there's any questions. I'm going to take just about 60 seconds. If you want to jot down any lingering questions, pieces that I need to elaborate or clarify in the chat box. Okay, my friends. Thank you so much, Hope, for your amazing insight. When we are willing to throw out the box, sometimes it's very validating for our parents and our families to realize just how much they already have at home that they can utilize to support their students' learning. I've been trying to sort of take pictures of my own kids, the way we use sticky notes and Uno cards, and we repurpose Monopoly games, and we do all sorts of things to reinforce math practices, science practices, STEM thinking and projects, all of those math standards, counting up, counting by twos, counting by tens, fractions, et cetera, with things that we find just around the house that have the flexibility of being implemented home by home in the language that they feel most comfortable operating in, okay? Okay. So for some of my friends, I'm getting a little bit of feedback that there are some people that are getting blocked from entering comments, questions, challenges. For those of you that already have my number. I'm going to ask that you just go ahead and text them to me. For those of you that don't, please know I am entering that in the chat box right now. And if for some reason we don't get to some of the questions, please know that we'll do an FAQ or something like that following this webinar, just to make sure that everybody has the information that they need and that we are making sure to really address the challenges, questions, concerns that you have. Because I don't think that we need to be solving these problems across the country all by ourselves when this work is happening across the country again. Okay. Okay. So my good friends, now that's our responsibility to ensure and protect the rights of our language learners. Here's the challenge, which is where some things have gotten a little bit murky. Okay, I want to make sure that I'm very, very upfront with that. And I want to also make sure that I'm upfront about the fact that I have a couple of emails out to a few state and federal agencies just to get clarity on one or two pieces that the language is so interestingly put that it leaves it very open to interpretation. Here's what I do know. Number one is that blanket waivers in the last 2 weeks have been issued to approximately 28 states in the last 2 weeks. I don't have accurate as of the 22nd, which is the time that we're posting. But I will tell you, for a number of student subpopulations, these waivers do compromise the civil rights of students if they're not seen in flexibility in how we deliver services and our programs, and or the timeline for completing certain things. These waivers are not intended to say we are not going to provide and ensure the protections of the civil rights of our students. These waivers, the intent behind them is to give states and school agencies flexibility in how they deliver those services and ensure the rights are protected, and the timeline for getting them completed, because there are some things that were intended to be done face-to-face. And we now just don't have that flexibility and ability for most states, except for a couple that are already starting to ease a few of their stay-at-home orders, okay? So I wanna make sure that I share that piece because as of the last 2 weeks, there are 28 states. The states I have listed in the actual PowerPoint itself that we've already shared. But because I can't stream it to you, I'm going to go ahead and share. If you are from one of these states, you all have spending waivers from all your title and federal funds. That is Alabama, Arkansas, Colorado, Delaware, Georgia, Hawaii, Iowa, Indiana, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Massachusetts, Maine, Missouri, Mississippi, North Dakota, New Hampshire, New York, Ohio, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, Utah, Virginia, Washington, Wisconsin, West Virginia, and Wyoming. Now, with that very long list of states, please know that there are many more applications for waivers that have been submitted, okay? These waivers are being called turnkey waivers that temporarily loosen up the regulations by ESSA. There are 4 titles in particular that are being impacted. No surprise to anybody. Title 1, 2, 3, 4 are the biggest ones that are impacted by these turnkey waivers. Okay, now, what does that mean for schools? Number one is that it means that minimum requirements of implementing supports, spending caps, rollover and carryover funds, the amount of time we have to spend funds, what these funds can be spent on, all of those things are flexible to ensure the rights of your students are protected, okay? Now, what does that mean? Again, the second to last slide in the web page or the PowerPoint, excuse me, sort of outlines what each of those waivers, what the implication is. Title I is for your students with low SES and how you ensure blended opportunities that include interactive activities, access to primary resources, use of personalized data to drive learning and personalization of learning and the learning environment for students to allow for greater collaboration for students and across staff who are serving students with unique needs. Improve the conditions for student learning, to make sure that we are engaged in the preparation, the training, continued, oh goodness, recruitment of staff, all of those pieces, and meeting the needs of our students with low, that qualify for low SES, socioeconomic status. All of those pieces are embedded in the waivers state by state. Please remember, the waivers are not meant to remove the responsibility of schools to ensure the protections and the rights of our students of language that are learning a second language. Excuse me, my friends, second language learners or multilingual learners, emergent bilinguals. It is intended to provide greater accessibility in terms of how we make that happen and greater flexibility in terms of the timeline to get certain things done in order to still utilize those funds, and greater flexibility in terms of what rollover and carry over from one year to the next looks like, so that if you want to tuck certain supports under the CARES funding that schools will receive, you're able to do that without having to worry about your Title I funds getting pulled by the state next year. That is the intent behind it. Now, again, I want to make sure that I'm very upfront that there's a couple of pieces within these turnkey waivers that I want to make sure that I'm clear on. But I will tell you, more than anything, right now, we are going to need your advocacy. We're going to have to, we are, as a community, are going to need to tap into and reach out to every single one of our advocates, our fellow sort of, I don't know, like equity fighters in and outside of the district, because I am concerned that there are some districts that are taking this opportunity to say, listen, we have to go fully digital, and this is what we have, and this is what we're offering. And that's not the intent of the turnkey waivers. And we are going to find ourselves in particular challenge with the DOJ, with civil rights issues, with bigger issues in equity, and more importantly, bigger equity gaps because of opportunity gaps during this long, extended, and unanticipated length of time away from school, okay? I want to stop here. I know that that's a lot of content. I didn't mean to go a full 40 minutes, just sort of talking at you. I appreciate everybody's flexibility. I want to make sure that I take some time to just look in on the text messages that I know have been coming in already, as well as leave time in the chat box for anybody who wants to just load their questions or their challenges, anything I may not have addressed right there. There's a couple of unique questions. There's a couple of unique questions in terms of resources. Those are kind of state-based, depending on what resources that you're looking for. And so I'm going to see if I can just share on my other screen my contact information so that you can email me directly, because I think that that's just a little bit more of a unique conversation based on exactly what resources you're looking for. I think sometimes we can give families a little bit too much, and then it's not helpful. It just feels overwhelming. Okay, so let me make sure that I get you all my information. Okay, and we're doing this very, 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 very old school. Oh no, that's just gonna be backwards. So hold on just one second. Let me see if I can figure this out. I am so technologically challenged. I thank everybody for bearing with me. So I have a fabulous question. I'm going to see if I can flip this camera before I answer it, if that's okay, Rania. No, porque yo soy, como tengo tantos problemas con la tecnología, esto es imposible. Pero for those of you that have specific questions, since I cannot, ¡ay! Lo leyeron bien, mira eso. Ok, pues perfecto. Yo te lo enseño otra vez. Okay, so my good friends, here you are. Okay, that is the website, www.tajulearning.com. And my direct email is alexandra.guilamo@tajulearning.com. If you want to see this information again, please know that you have the link to the PDF of this PowerPoint in the chat box. It's also posted with the, ¿cómo se llama eso? The YouTube video itself. It's also being posted on our website, just to make sure that everybody, perfect, that everybody is perfect. We can see it. Ay, Dios mío. Okay, so thank you, my friends. It's not backwards because apparently YouTube adjusts and accounts for my lack of technological skills. So thank you. Y sí, yo soy extra especial. Okay. So there's an interesting question that did come up from my friends in Massachusetts, and that is, if we partner with some of our community agencies, do we have to worry about student privacy laws? This is an interesting question. There are some pieces that you can share with community partners. There are some things that you cannot. So you're going to want to, number one, because I know you, please reach out to me. Let's talk about exactly what partnership you need, for what purposes, and what platform you would be allowing that collaboration to happen, what it is that you want from that community partner, and what level of data would they need, and that will help us to ask the right and specific questions from your law department. When we work with districts, we regularly have access to student data, and there are some pieces that we can have access to. There's some things that we cannot have access to, or we have to get waivers, right? And so I want to make sure that I'm answering that question very strategically and accurately, and that we are looping in your legal department in the way that needs to, but that's a legal question, okay? One of the other questions is getting some specific information to families for non-e-learning or non-digital learning based opportunities. And so there are some districts that have been very hesitant to leverage partners, times, schools, buildings that they already have open, that are already facilitating other things that our families need. And the recommendation that I have made to those school districts is, we cannot shoot down an idea that lessens the burden, that lessens the challenge, and that creates greater ease for our families. Because we are fearful that we have our own panic, right? Like, we have to slow down our own panic as educational leaders and say, or creating any additional and possible challenges and health risks to our families. So for example, there was some concern in a couple of states that I was working with around offering learning kits that are completely non-digital, that had books, different materials that families can use to do makerspace, and just like a list of activities of science and math projects and activities that they can do in the kitchen or in their backyard. And there was concern by the nutrition debris. And, the recommendation was that it's possible, right? Depending on what's happening, but it can't just be a concern that everybody says, yep, we're not going to do it, without taking your due diligence to make the phone call to the CDC, to contact your local health organizations, to ensure that whatever policies or restrictions that are already designed to ensure social distancing are honored, are taken into account, because we're saying we're not going to remove barriers for no other reason, because we don't want to remove barriers, right? So that responsibility that we have on the part of ourselves as educators still exists, to mitigate the challenges of our families and to offer blended options rather than fully digital options for those families, particularly that are going to struggle either with their understanding of how to use those tools or access to those tools, period. Okay? All right. Estoy leyendo, yo creo que ya contesté la mayoría de las preguntas. And because it's been an hour and ya me estoy cansando. Y el español se me está saliendo. So it's time for me to sign off, my friends. Please know that the way we deliver our free Wednesday webinar for next week and moving forward will probably change, because I need to be comfortable in a platform that I can share all the fancy stuff that I have, and I want to show you guys. I know it's easier when you have the presentation right there in front of you, and I can be navigating and manipulating back and forth. So we will make sure to communicate that out to everybody as soon as possible. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us if you have PD needs that you need to do online, if you have additional questions that are unique to your building, your community, your state. If you just want something clarified, if you need a thinking partner, please know that right now, your number one job is advocacy for stability and equity. And, whether or not they finish a certain number of lessons on their online thing, fill in the blank for that word thing, that will come. But that is not the primary thing that we need to ensure right now, okay? I wish everybody health, safety, wellness, physical, mental, emotional wellness. Le estoy mandando beso a todo el mundo y nos veremos la semana que viene. Adiós.